A lab reactor is a sophisticated blender. During mixing, it also heats or cools ingredients to promote a reaction. And there are ports for attachments like a condenser. Making lab reactors starts with solid glass rods for agitator shafts. The rods are sometimes a bit crooked, so they heat and move them across rollers to straighten them. Grinding wheels round their shape to more precise contours, and a wet sanding smooths the surface. The operator measures the outer diameter of each rod. A worker heats one end of the rod and forms a rim using a special tool. He applies dabs of liquid glass just below the rim. This creates nubs for properly situating the blade hub on the shaft. To make the reactor's inner wall, he scores a wide glass tube and exposes the score line to a flame and then water. Another worker heats the top end. He supports the glass with a wide paddle until it's malleable enough to shape. A forming tool shapes it into a wide lip that will serve as the opening of the reactor. He aims a flame at the newly formed flange to smooth out any imperfections. They slide a larger glass vessel over the flask, then fuse them at both ends. This creates a hollow jacket through which liquids will be pumped to heat or cool the contents of the flask. A worker cuts another glass tube to length. He scores it lightly and exposes it to fire and water to break it along the etched line. He shapes the tube into a port for the outside of the reactor jacket. He'll make 2 of these ports. They'll be used to circulate heating and cooling liquids. Using the torch, a worker softens a spot on the reactor jacket. With tweezers, he pulls away the softened glass, creating a hole for the port to be installed. After inserting a ceramic holder in the port to more safely manipulate it, he fuses it to the hole on an angle. Once the seam solidifies, the port will be an intrinsic part of the lab reactor vessel. Abrasive wheels grind another glass tube to make it perfectly round. This tube will be part of a drainage valve. An employee then begins work on the rest of the drainage valve assembly. He forms an internal thread for a plug. And, after cutting it shorter, another worker creates a flange on the other end. He burns a hole in the side of the valve tube. The drainage tubing, now also cut shorter, is ready to be attached to the rest of the valve. He heats the connecting points, and they melt and meld together. Partway through, he compares the valve assembly to a blueprint. Then he melts the seam a little more to fully close it. Since we last saw it, the reactor vessel has received a base. A worker burns a hole in that base and fuses the drainage valve to it. Another employee then places the reactor vessel in a fixture and checks that it sits level in it. She adds specific amounts of water incrementally, beginning with 500 milliliters. She draws a line on the outside of the reactor vessel to indicate the amount inside. This will provide a reference for affixing a scale. Using the markings as a guide, she applies the ceramic scale. They'll become part of the glass when the vessel is baked and slowly cooled to strengthen it. Stay tuned for a lot more as this lab reactor comes together to create a stir. A lab reactor needs sturdy impeller blades to generate an effective chemical reaction. An automated milling tool cuts a notch in a disc made from strong, chemically resistant plastic. Another system carves screw threads into a hub made of the same material. A tool bores a hole in the center for the insertion of the agitator shaft. The operator smooths the threads with fine sandpaper. They then assemble the blades to the hub. Next is the condenser. It's an attachment through which vapor will travel to be transformed into a liquid. The worker twists the softened glass tube around a rod to form the coil. Another worker inserts a linear glass tube in the center of the coil. She melts glass near the bottom to seal the center tube to the coil. Moving to the top, she heats the glass and, with tweezers, pulls a bit from the end of the coil to pry it open. With a pick, she opens it up a little more. She uses a graphite reaming tool to shape the glass opening into a more flared profile. The condenser body takes shape. The worker forms a joint on the end. He places the condenser body joint on a spinning grinding tool and applies an abrasive compound between them. It grinds the joint's inner diameter to a precise dimension and gives it a smooth finish. He inserts a standard joint to test the fit. The coil can now be inserted into the condenser body. She fuses the condenser wall to the coil and burns holes in the glass wall to connect hose attachments. She exposes the seam to a less focused flame to bring down the temperature slowly. The next worker creates a joint for the lower end of the condenser. It will be used to connect the condenser to the reactor. Once the basic tapered profile has been achieved, grinding tools size it more precisely. When the connector joint has been cut to length, the worker attaches it to the base of the condenser. Another glass fabricator makes more joints, one of which will connect the condenser to the reactor lid, or head as it's known in the industry. He keeps the glass tube long for easy handling and then cuts it to the correct length. They now seal the center joint to a hole in the reactor lid. He burns holes in the reactor head for other connectors. As the glass balloons up, he pulls it away to fully open the hole. With all the connectors fused to the reactor head, a worker grinds the base of its flange against an abrasive wheel to make it perfectly even. An employee then applies decals to the head. These indicate the brand and the connector's size. The decals will be baked into the glass during a final annealing. He places all the parts in the annealing oven. The temperature gradually ramps up to 560 degrees Celsius and slowly cools. This final annealing removes internal stresses and strengthens the glass. An inspector scrutinizes the head with a tool to confirm that the connector joints are in proper alignment and positioned at the correct angle. They install the vessel on a stand, insert the shaft and blades, attach the head, and connect the condenser. To simulate the operation, a technician pours liquid into the reactor. He adds colorful plastic solids that will show up better for this demonstration. He activates the impeller blades. These blades are designed to lift solids to the top, and they do that effectively. He also runs cooling liquids through the condenser. In practice, the cool coil will cause vapors from the vessel to convert back to a liquid. This lab reactor is now ready to help prove something.